Hi friends! Back in 2020, we made a video called A Guide to Nonbinary Identities, and I decided that I wanted to make a sequel about sexualities. Figuring out your sexuality can be just as difficult as figuring out your gender identity, and so I hope that this video helps you navigate the sometimes confusing but often beautiful world of human sexuality. Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Maddie, and here on this channel, we make videos primarily about LGBT topics and mental health, and this video is no exception to that rule. So what is sexuality exactly? Well, sexuality, also known as sexual orientation, refers to the category of people that one tends to be sexually attracted to. That is, whether you're attracted to men, women, non-binary folks, some combination thereof, none of the above, and so on. Closely related, but definitely still distinct, is romantic orientation, which refers to the category of people that one tends to be romantically attracted to. For many people, the Venn diagram of people you're romantically attracted to and people you're sexually attracted to is a circle, but that's not the case for everyone. Some people experience what is known as split attraction, meaning that the people who they are sexually attracted to is not necessarily identical to the people who they are romantically attracted to. I'm going to be referencing the split attraction model a lot in this video, so if you don't quite get it now, hopefully you will by the end of the video. So the most common sexuality is heterosexual, better known as straight. This refers to men who are exclusively attracted to women and women who are exclusively attracted to men. Also, just to be perfectly clear, heterosexuality does not only include cisgender men and women, it also includes transgender men and women as well. Trans people can be straight, and straight cis people with trans partners of the other binary gender are still straight. In fact, all of the sexualities that I mentioned in this video are trans-inclusive. You may find some people who say, as an insert sexuality here, I'm not attracted to trans people, and that's a topic for a future video. But the fact of the matter is that trans women are women and trans men are men, and so when I talk about men and women throughout this video, I want it to be clear that I'm talking about cis and trans people alike. And one last thing. People who are romantically attracted to the opposite binary gender are called heteroromantic. I don't know why that word doesn't roll off the tongue, but it never does. Heteroromantic people can also be heterosexual, and many are, but they can also be any other sexuality. So the next sexuality I want to talk about is lesbian. The more technical term, if you will, is homosexual, but this term is kind of clinical and outdated, so we don't really use it anymore. Homoromantic is still okay though. Anyway, lesbians are women who are exclusively attracted to other women. Usually. One phenomenon that I've noticed recently is that the label of lesbian is gradually becoming more and more inclusive of non-binary people, people who don't 100% identify as male or female. Either that or lesbians have always been accepting of MBs and I just didn't know it. That being said, there does seem to be a trend of exclusive attraction to femininity and people who are feminine of center. So for example, a cisgender lesbian may have a non-binary partner, but that partner may be more likely to present in feminine ways. Or conversely, a non-binary lesbian may be non-binary because they don't identify 100% as female, and a lesbian because they identify more with femininity than they do masculinity or androgyny, and are attracted to people who also identify more with femininity. At one point, I proposed that the term lesbian ought to mean femme folks who are exclusively attracted to other femme folks, but I think that term may encroach on the territory of the bisexuals, polysexuals, and pansexuals. Also, that definition could end up excluding lesbians who are attracted to masculine women. So for the sake of simplicity, we're going to say that lesbians are women who are exclusively attracted to other women, but terms and conditions may apply. The outdated and clinical term homosexual doesn't just refer to women, though. It also refers to men who adopt the label of gay. And just about everything I said about lesbians a little bit ago applies to gay men, but in the reverse. Non-binary people identifying as gay? Check. Gay men with non-binary partners? Check. Still, the best definition we have for what it means to be gay is men who are exclusively attracted to other men. Except, did I also mention that gay is an umbrella term? As a general rule, anyone whose sexuality isn't heterosexual can use the term gay. Some gay men don't like this, but as a community we've kind of overruled them due to historical precedent. That is, the label of gay has been an umbrella term for decades, and that's unlikely to change anytime soon. So the word gay refers to men who are exclusively attracted to men, except for when we're including non-binary people in the mix, and except for when we're referring to literally everyone who's not straight. We're only 3 sexualities in, and we've got a few more to go, but I wanted to take a break to check in. How are you feeling? Are you still with me? For For some of you, this is probably all common knowledge, and for some of you, you might be a bit confused. I promise that I'm not trying to overcomplicate things for the sake of overcomplicating things. It's just that, at the end of the day, we're still deciding for ourselves as a community where we draw the lines. It's honestly such an exciting time to be part of the queer community because we're literally making history by virtue of being alive, being our most authentic selves, and not allowing anyone to count us out. But that's the thing, we're living in the middle of history. Hindsight is 20/20, but the present can be blurry. One day, when all the lines are drawn and there's a label for every identity, we may look back and wonder why we had so few labels to describe so many identities. Conversely, we may wonder why we had so many labels when the labels we already had were broad enough to include everyone. Either way, I hope that the end result is one where every queer person feels at home within their respective communities and within the LGBTQIA+ community as a whole. That's not a guarantee either, but I hope we reach that point, preferably in the nearest future. Okay, break over. The next sexuality on the list is bisexual, or biromantic if you're talking about romantic orientation. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna let the split attraction model have its own section instead of mentioning it alongside every single sexuality. Long story short, if you want to know what the romantic equivalent of a sexuality is, just remove the prefix and affix it to the word romantic. So bisexual becomes biromantic, pansexual becomes panromantic, asexual becomes aromantic, and so on. Don't worry, I'll do a deep dive on the split attraction model towards the end of this video. Anyway, bisexual refers to a person of any gender who is attracted to the same gender and other genders. For example, a bisexual woman is someone who's attracted to women and people of other genders. Could be men, could be androgynes, gender fluid folks, genderqueer folks, agender folks, you name it. For some of you, this may be somewhat of a surprise, as people often assume that being bisexual means that you're attracted to men and women. And for some bisexual people, that's exactly what it means. But for decades now, bisexuals have been adopting a much more broad and expansive definition of their sexuality that includes more people than you may first assume. Also, there are two more words that I want to add on to the end here: Sapphic and Achillean. The word Sapphic refers broadly to women who love women, and Achillean refers to men who love men. These words do not, however, automatically imply exclusive attraction. A lesbian and a bisexual woman are both Sapphic because they are both women who love women, and a gay man and a bisexual man are both Achillean because they are both men who love men. And naturally, the same goes for other queer people who experience same-gender attraction, not just bisexuals, gays, and lesbians. In my experience, Sapphic and Achillean are very useful terms to use, especially when you're trying to figure out the dimensions of your sexuality. Like, for me, am I a lesbian? Am I bisexual? Am I pansexual? I'm not entirely sure, but if there's one thing that I do know, it's that I'm Sapphic. Next up is polysexual, which refers to people who are attracted to multiple genders. But wait, I hear you say, how does this differ from being bisexual? And honestly, there is a lot of overlap between the two. But the way I understand it, polysexual is a label that allows for two things that bisexuality doesn't have. The first is an option to not be attracted to the same gender. So a polysexual man might be attracted to women and non-binary people, but not men. I could be wrong about that though, so please feel free to correct me. And the second thing is the option to not be perceived as only liking men and women, because let's be honest, even though bisexuals have been trying to do away with the misconception that bi people can only like men and women, when you come out to someone as bisexual, they're gonna assume that you like men and women. That's honestly the number one reason why I don't use the label of bisexual, despite the fact that it's probably the most accurate for me. The downside of adopting the label of polysexual is that you're probably going to have to explain what it means to everyone you come into contact with. But then again, that might actually be an upside for some people. If you don't want people to misunderstand your identity, make them ask you, I guess. I'm admittedly unclear on all of the differences between bisexuality and polysexuality, but the people who adopt these labels value the subtle differences therein, and I think that's both important and wonderful. Diversity is a good thing. I want to take a brief moment to mention polyamory, which is sometimes confused for polysexuality, even though polyamory isn't a sexuality at all. Polyamory refers to the inclination, potential, or desire to have romantic or sexual relationships with more than one person. The alternative is monogamy, which refers to the inclination, potential, or desire to have a romantic or sexual relationship with just one person, either permanently or simply one person at a time. To be clear, polyamory ought to always be practiced with consent and the full knowledge of every person involved. If your partner engages in romantic or sexual behaviors with other people without your knowledge or consent and tries to blame it on polyamory, that's not polyamory, that's just cheating. But if your partner comes to you and says, hey, I love you, but I also have feelings for this other person, is it okay if I explore those? Your partner is probably polyamorous and they're doing the right thing by communicating with you. Polyamorous people can be straight, gay, bi, or literally any other sexuality, which is why polyamory isn't a sexuality in and of itself. That being said, I do firmly believe that polyamory is a queer identity because it disrupts this social paradigm of a relationship being between one man and one woman. And yeah, I wanted to make sure I included polyamory in here, because most of the time when people say I'm poly or I'm polyam, what they actually mean is I'm polyamorous and not I'm polysexual. If you want to know more about polyamory, I have a video coming out on the topic next month, so stay tuned for that. Next we have pansexuality, which refers to people who are attracted to all genders. If bisexuality and polysexuality represent the multiple but not all camp, pansexuality represents the people who essentially say gender doesn't matter to me. It should be noted that some people do draw a distinction between pansexuality and omnisexuality. Both pan and omni mean all, but the common understanding is that pan people don't have a gender preference and omni people do. I've heard it described as pan people not seeing gender, but that idea really bothers me if I'm gonna be honest. It kind of reminds me of the people who claim not to see color. When you don't see a person's identity, you don't see that person for who they truly are, and you also end up ignoring the unique struggles that a person goes through because of their identity. So the idea of not seeing gender doesn't sit well with me, but the idea of preference makes a good deal of sense, even if I can totally foresee some pansexuals saying, I'm pan, but that doesn't mean I don't have a preference. Ultimately, just like bisexuality and polysexuality, there's a lot of overlap between pansexuality and omnisexuality, but there's enough of a distinction that both deserve to be recognized as valid. And ultimately, it's important to remember that not understanding something doesn't mean we can't respect it. Before we move on, there's one more term that I want to share, and that's MSpec. MSpec is short for multisexual spectrum, and it refers to anyone who's attracted to more than one gender. So bisexual, pansexual, and polysexual are all MSpec identities, as are some of the labels we're going to talk about later on in the video. Next, I want to move into some sexualities that some of y'all might not have heard of, and these are sexualities that are specifically related to trans and non-binary individuals. This first sexuality is one that I recently learned from a member of this community during a live stream, which is Neptunic. Remember how I said that we're still deciding for ourselves as a community where we draw the lines? I feel like this sexuality is a perfect example of just that, and I think it's a label that we need in the community, and not just because it almost fits me. The label of Neptunic refers to people of any gender who are exclusively attracted to women and non-binary people, specifically feminine non-binary people. And the opposite of Neptunic is Uranic, which refers to people of any gender who are exclusively attracted to men and non-binary people, specifically masculine non-binary people. Something that I think is important to note here, though, is that sexuality labels are never supposed to be forced upon people. Same with gender identity labels for that matter. If a self-identified lesbian is dating a non-binary person, it's not anyone else's job to tell her that she's actually Neptunic. If a self-identified gay man is dating a non-binary person, it's not anyone else's job to tell him that he's actually Uranic. If they're looking for a different label or express confusion with their current label, then sure, offer up an alternative. But as long as it's not hurting anyone, people deserve to claim the label that makes them feel most comfortable. And while there are some instances where insisting on an incorrect or inaccurate label is harmful, it's probably not as often as you think. Also, in case you were wondering, both Uranic and Neptunic are MSpec identities. Moving on, the term Ceterosexual refers to people who are exclusively attracted to trans and non-binary folks. Most often this term is used by trans and non-binary people who are attracted to other trans and non-binary people, but it can also be used for cis people whose sole attraction is towards trans and non-binary people. The main question I had when I first heard about this sexuality was, how can you just know that someone is trans or non-binary? Obviously, some people are visibly trans. Using myself as an example, I'm wearing a dress right now and I just got my hair done, but I still think that my voice, among other things, would cause most people to say, oh, Maddie's a trans woman. And to be clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being visibly trans. Trans is beautiful no matter what stage of your journey you're at. But my point is, there are plenty of people who you wouldn't know were trans or non-binary unless they told you. So how can someone just say that they're exclusively attracted to trans or non-binary people? And the answer is simple: you can't. Thing is, we base a lot of our attraction to other people based on things we can't see at first glance. Personally, I'm attracted to people who are curious, people who are passionate, people who enjoy and appreciate animation, people who are creative, people who are left-leaning or preferably full-blown leftists, people who care about the environment, people who are open to spiritual experiences, the list goes on. But none of those things are things that you can tell by looking at someone. From what I understand, heterosexuality isn't a sexuality that's based on what you can see at first glance. For trans and non-binary people, it's often about wanting someone who has similar lived experiences as you, which makes a lot of sense. The trans experience is definitely a unique one that a lot of cis people don't fully understand. And as for cis people who are solely attracted to trans and non-binary people, what can I say? We're cute. Next, I want to focus on two sexualities that are a matched set, kind of like Uranic and Neptunic. And these sexualities are Trixic and Toric. Trixic, also known as Orbesian, refers to non-binary people who are attracted to women, and Toric, also known as Quadresian, refers to non-binary people who are attracted to men. As I mentioned earlier, there are non-binary folks who are comfortable with labels like lesbian, gay, bi, etc., so not all MBs will use the label of Trixic or Toric, but there are times when it definitely comes in handy. For example, if someone is a masc-aligned non-binary person who's attracted to women, well, they're not straight because they're not a man, but they're definitely not a lesbian because they're not a woman. Trixic seems like a perfect contender for this person in question. On that note, it's worth noting that just like Sapphic and Achillean, Trixic and Toric do not refer to exclusive attraction. Toric people can like women and MBs as well, and Trixic people can like men and MBs too. With the case of each of these four words though, Sapphic, Achillean, Trixic, and Toric, I think it's safe to assume that they do indicate preference. Like someone who's Toric or Achillean may occasionally be interested in other genders, but most of the time they're going to be interested in men. I know that's at least true for me as someone who's Sapphic with regard to my attraction to femininity, but if your experiences are different, let us know in the comments. And now we've arrived at the A spectrum. All of the sexualities I've mentioned thus far refer to people who experience sexual attraction, people who are allosexual. But not everyone does experience sexual attraction, and not everyone who experiences it as consistently or strongly as allosexuals do. People like this are said to be on the asexual spectrum, and we call it a spectrum because there are a few different A-spec or asexual spectrum labels to be explored. The first A-spec label is, of course, asexual, ace for short, and aces don't experience sexual attraction, like, at all. And there are two things I want to stress about asexuality. First, asexuality is not the same thing as celibacy. Celibacy is a choice that people make to abstain from sex. Emphasis on the word choice. Asexuality and other A-spec identities are not a choice, just like every single sexuality I've mentioned thus far. They are an inherent part of who a person is. And second, not all aces experience their asexuality in the same way. Some are sex repulsed, some are sex indifferent, and some are sex favorable. After all, being asexual doesn't mean that you don't have a libido. Being asexual just means that someone doesn't experience sexual attraction. It doesn't dictate how they do or don't respond in sexual situations. Next is Grey-Asexual, which refers to people who only very rarely experience sexual attraction. Literally everything I just mentioned about aces apply to gray aces as well, but on occasion, every now and then when there's a blue moon and a solar eclipse on the same day, gray aces will experience sexual attraction. I'm obviously being overdramatic, but it's to make a point. Gray aces are valid valid aces, and gray aces deserve to have their identities respected. Demisexual is next on this list, and this refers to people who only experience sexual attraction after they've formed a close personal bond with someone. One of the most common responses I've heard to demisexuality is, but everyone's like that. And here's the thing, no. How often do commercials use shirtless men and bikini-clad women to sell products because they know they'll evoke a sexual response in the viewer? How often do people look at celebrities who they don't know and talk about how much of a crush they have on them? I know that crushes technically fall under romantic orientation, but you know what I mean. People go pretty far in their obsession over celebrities. When you think about it, the entire adult film industry exists because most people experience sexual attraction towards people they don't know. But when it comes to demisexuals, a close personal relationship is a must before they start experiencing any kind of sexual attraction. Next we have reciprosexual, which refers to people who don't experience sexual attraction until they know that someone else is sexually attracted to them, at which point they reciprocate the feeling. And the exact polar opposite of this sexuality is Akoisexual, which refers to people who experience sexual attraction until they realize that those feelings have been reciprocated, at which point the feelings fade. Lastly, I want to talk about one of my favorite catch-all terms for the community, which is queer. On the surface, queer just means not straight. It's often used by people who are attracted to more than one gender, who don't feel comfortable with labels like bi or pan, but it can also definitely be used by people who are attracted to just one gender. What makes identifying as queer so unique is that queer is also a politically charged term. It was originally used as an insult, which is why it should never be used for someone without their permission, but it's been reclaimed by those of us who are committed to combating cis-het hegemony in all its many forms, be that in politics, in religion and spirituality, in education, wherever it might show up. I won't speak for everyone who uses this term, but when I say I'm queer, what I'm essentially saying is, this world wasn't built for people like me, so I'm here to create a new one. For me, queerness permeates everything I do. You can't separate me from my queerness any more than you can separate me from my blackness. And so yeah, on the surface, being queer means not being straight, but when you dig a little deeper, there's so much more to it. Anyway, I promised that I'd come back to the split attraction model, so I wanted to make sure I talked about it now that we have a bit more context about what some of these labels mean. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people experience sexual attraction and romantic attraction in the exact same way. For example, if you're sexually attracted to all genders and romantically attracted to all genders, you're probably not going to call yourself pan-romantic pansexual. You're just going to call yourself pansexual or pan. But that's not the case for everyone. For example, what if you're a man who only wants to date other men, but you don't experience sexual attraction? Saying that you're gay might work out in some cases, but it would completely gloss over the fact that you're also asexual. Saying that you're asexual might also be really informative, but it wouldn't really say anything about the gender of the people you're attracted to. But if you wanted to smush the two together, you could always say that you're a homoromantic asexual. Or, of course, you could also say, I'm gay and ace. That works too. For this example, I'm going to use a character from my book, which you can read the first draft of if you support me on Patreon. Say you have a trans woman who doesn't experience romantic attraction at all, but she's exclusively sexually attracted to other women, cis or trans. What might her label be? Pause if you want a few extra seconds to come up with an answer. If you said that she'd be an aromantic lesbian, you'd be spot on. Honestly, if you want to get some practice in with some of these labels, I think the best thing you can do is combine sexual and romantic orientation labels and see if you can figure out what they mean. Or alternatively, you could create a character in your head, outline their preferences, and then try to figure out what labels fit them. For now, I'll leave you with an example of each. First, if someone told you that they were an Akoiromantic reciprosexual, what would that mean? And I'll use another character from my book as the second example. Say you have a cis woman who is romantically attracted to people of all genders, but only sexually attracted to people she's formed a close personal bond with. What might her label be? Leave your answers down in the comments below. And that's all I've got for you today. Make sure you congratulate yourself if you made it all the way to the end of this video, cause I really didn't pull any punches with the amount of information that I threw at you. If there was anything that was unclear, feel free to ask questions in the comments below. And if I miss any sexualities, as I'm sure I did, feel free to let me know and I'll make the ones I missed into a community post or something like that. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content just like this. Also, if you want to support the work we do on this channel, please consider supporting us on Patreon, links in the description below. But most importantly, remember that you're wonderful, and that the world is a better place because you're in it. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Bye!